Dr. Tracy, I'm so excited to have you on the Mind Your Hormones podcast. I heard you on another podcast, and obviously now I listen to yours as well, which is so incredible. I'm obsessed with all your content on your Instagram, like everything. And I'm so excited to have you on to talk to the community about all things communication with relationships and everything. But before we dive right in, can you just introduce yourself and tell us how you got into this space?
Yeah. And Corinne, thank you so much for inviting me into your space here. I'm
Yes.
so blessed to be able to sit with you and grateful to be able to speak with your community as well. Gosh, how did I get into this space? Truthfully, it was in the middle of one of our Canadian winters, and I was nursing my daughter, and she was 8 months old. And already being a psychologist and couples therapist for several years, I remember feeling dissatisfied with the information that was being shared around mental health and around our relationships,
Mm,
particularly what it means to be a parent and what it means on that journey and transition in our relationships. So
yeah.
that started my Instagram space, Dr. Tracy D. It started the podcast and all of my online resources because it was aligning with one of my most important values, which is that I wanted to reach more people outside of my therapy office. So I
Mm.
regularly see clients, typically mothers. I also see men and couples on all different phases in our, all different seasons that we're in terms of our relationships.
Yeah.
And it's just such a gift to be able to sit with people in their vulnerability and their struggle.
Yeah, I love it. And you focus on EFT, right? Emotionally focused therapy. Can you just explain what that is if someone's listening and they don't or they're not familiar?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do work from an integrative perspective. And what that means really is that when you come into my office, when we're working together, it means that I'm going to see where you're at and what interventions I need to use because we know that a one size doesn't fit all and
Hmm.
everybody's going to show up differently. From an emotionally focused couples therapy, what this means is that we understand that we all have these core attachment needs and longings in our
Mm.
relationships. It is at the primary core of who we are and our beings is that we long to be connected to our caregivers. This
Mm.
is a cradle to grave, as Dr. John Bowlby, the creator of attachment theory, as he researched, is that this is lifelong. And so oftentimes what happens in our relationships is we start to get stuck in these unhelpful negative cycles that are
Hmm.
filled with negative emotions like anger, frustration, resentment, that then lead us to stop sharing our needs and softer feelings like sadness, loneliness, vulnerability,
Mm.
pain, inadequacy. And oftentimes those emotions are connected to a need that we have, which those needs can be need for connection, need to feel close and important to our partners, or need to feel like we're good enough.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into that right there with the attachments and the core needs of relationships. So, what would you say, what are like the core needs of all relationships and, partnerships? And then what are the different like brief attachment styles so we can maybe identify like, okay, this is maybe what my attachment style is, this is what my partner's is, so that we could just have a deeper understanding of what that looks like because I'm assuming that that's really important and that's going to help with communication.
Absolutely. You know, what's interesting about this, Corinne, is one of the things that I find with heterosexual couples is that in that negative communication cycle that shows up, oftentimes the core need for women are surrounding issues related to connection.
Mm.
Do I matter to you? Am I important to you? Do you come to me and care with me, like care for me in that way? And then when I look at men, the common themes that show up are, am I adequate? Am I
Mm.
enough for you? And so
Wow.
oftentimes when men are in therapy and they're defensive or they're stonewalling and shutting down on their partner, when we start working through what's underneath that, we find a lot of men say things like, I feel like I'm always failing. Like I can never get it
Mm.
right. And the more that I can never get it right, the more I feel like I'm inadequate. And then when we can keep working in the therapy room, what then starts to show up is, and this is just like with my dad, where I would try to go out and tinker on the car with him or cut the lawn with him. And he would be like, you can't do it right. Get out of here. I'll just do it myself.
Right. Wow.
Right. So so this is the example of how we show up in today's relationship, often almost like we are in different time zones and
Mm,
we are replaying out these old patterns and wounds that if we don't go inwards and understand what they are and to start exploring those and sharing them with our partner, we just get looped in around the upstairs stuff, right? Where the
right.
upstairs stuff sounds like one partner is like, you don't pay attention to me, you're always on your phone. And the other
Mhm.
one's like, well, maybe if you weren't so angry with me, then I'd actually want to sit down and cuddle with you and be close
Yeah.
with you. And
Right.
back and forth we go, right? Instead of then being able to talk about, there are these moments when you're on your phone, and I get it because we've got work and family and all the things. And then I feel so alone in those moments
Mm,
because I really miss connecting with you. And when I'm talking to you and you're not listening to me, it reminds me of how my mother would just dismiss all of my feelings. And
mm.
I felt like I wasn't important in my family or I didn't have a space. So that's kind of
Wow.
where there's like that core need that's underneath
Yeah.
that, Corinne, where like
Mhm.
we think that we just need to find the solution. We just need to find the solution. If you just picked up your socks, then we would be okay, right? If you just did the dishes, if what like was it, if we were having more sex, then
Mhm.
we'd be okay. And yet
Right.
this doesn't address the deeper underlying issues that couples are often struggling with.
Yeah. And how do you get down to that when, if the partner is defensive or closed off to it? Because most of the time, if it is, whether it's heterosexual or it's a same sex couple, mostly what I see with like my clients and stuff, and just like with friends and everything with heterosexual couples, most of the time, the women are more interested in personal development and like going more towards this than the men are. And it could be like kind of like dragging them to like, okay, what I want to do therapy or I want to
Yeah.
do these things. So like, how can we, because obviously we don't want to force it because it's not going to do
Mm.
anything if you force them into a room. So I'm sure you've had experiences like this with clients. So how do we like broach that topic so that we can go deeper, because obviously sometimes it needs, I mean, maybe you could do it within the home. I don't know if you have any suggestions about that before going into a therapy session, because that might be more or less intimidating for someone who is pretty defensive. So what would you say for that?
I first want the listeners to know that when you come to therapy as a couple, that your therapist who's going to be a right fit for you is going to be someone that wants to hear from both perspectives. And that we
Mhm.
know from our therapist perspective is that neither one of you are the bad person or the bad guy in the relationship. And instead, it's that negative cycle that takes over. That's what we want to shift to. So it's not you versus me. I'm not trying to find the bad guy in a situation because of all the fights I've heard, there is no right or wrong way. Should you leave your socks in that place or not? How do you, cut carrots in the right way? And we're not going to get stuck in that. But instead, what we look at though is, what are the ways in which we're missing each other? And how can we then also be a you and me versus the problem in front of us? And I think that's really
Mm,
important. So at home with our partners who tend to be more resistant, it's really difficult because as you're saying, Corinne, we can come into this space of really knowing, right? Like
mhm,
it's just like, this is what I want, this is what I'm doing, we're gonna go do it. And it's
mhm.
very top down versus a
Yeah.
bottom up perspective. And a bottom up perspective is, I'm wondering, love, what doesn't feel good for you in our relationship? What would you
Mm,
like more of? Would you like to have more sex? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's something that we could work on. And we could do
yeah.
that with the help of an outside person.
Mm,
Or the other approach is being able to say, what is something that you're afraid is going to happen in therapy? Oh, you're afraid you're going to be blamed. Well, let's make sure that we find a therapist that doesn't blame you because that's not what we want to happen. And also, that's
right.
not the goal of therapy. So
Mm,
sometimes that resistance is attached to fear. It's
mm,
attached to not knowing something and a hesitation, which is normal. And then also, too, we can loop this back to our attachment styles.
yeah.
If we then think of, okay, so for the listeners, I always want to give this caveat is that we really like to find certainty in how we understand things. Our
Mm,
attachment styles, our attachment behaviors are, this is one way of understanding who you are and what's happening in your relationship. It's not the only way,
right.
but we know that the attachment system is activated in times of stress and anxiety. And the
Mm,
question is, how am I going to turn to you? How do I believe that you will respond to me? And are we going to be able to work through this together? So
Wow.
there's this like seeking piece and my belief in my mind about you and how you're going to respond to me.
And are we born with an attachment style, or do we develop this through our childhood?
We develop it through early experiences
Okay.
and ongoing experiences throughout our life. So, research shows that our attachment style can change across the lifespan. It
Okay.
can change with different partners. It can change with one partner throughout various moments in a relationship. This
Okay.
isn't something that changes day to day, but let's say, for example, you're bumping along and you feel secure with your partner, and then something significant happens. Your mom gets sick, and
Mm,
then they're not there for you. And then whatever else happens, then suddenly that shifts something within you. So
right.
sometimes, or the other piece is this repeated, constant, long-standing distress in a relationship where you don't feel connected, you can't turn to each other. That
Mm,
is going to be a weakening of that attachment bond because you stop reaching to the other person and allowing them to respond to you. So for
mm,
people listening, I want to maybe step out of the attachment styles and
mm-hmm.
encourage you to instead ask yourself, when I'm needing something, what do I do? Am I able to turn to my partner and say, I'm struggling right now. I really need you to help. And if they
Mm,
say, I can't do it right now, you can say, I get it. I need us to do it by tomorrow. Can we make that date tomorrow night at dinner time? Yes,
mm,
absolutely. Okay. So that's secure attachment. When
okay.
we go into an insecure space, we would be high on anxiety, which looks like upping the ante. What do you mean you can't do it now? We have to do it right now. I don't feel good. We have to work through this right now.
Mm,
Or oftentimes someone who is more anxious, who hyperactivates their needs, will feel this pressing urge to work through any distance or disagreement between them and their partner. That is a
mm,
threat to the relationship. Instead of being able to tolerate that I can have a different opinion than you,
That
and
sounds like me. Whatever that attachment style is, sounds
so
like me,
leaning
to
more
be
towards
honest.
anxiety. Yeah, leaning
Yeah.
more towards anxiety. So then someone leaning more towards avoidance then is someone who deactivates.
Mm,
And so I think what's important to understand is that all people have emotional reactions and we all have needs. But the
mm,
question then is, what do we do in those moments? And that's what tends to signal how we feel in our connection and our attachment style. So the person who deactivates their needs is someone who's more avoidant,
mm,
and they still have all the same feelings and needs, but it's this rush inside of them and it's too overwhelming. And so they shut it down.
mm,
And both people, whether you're high in anxiety or avoidance, they will experience early on in other relationships in their early upbringings, maybe incongruence or mixed messages with parenting.
mm,
Someone who is experiencing more avoidant attachment will be someone who their parent was emotionally neglectful, or
mm,
they grew up in an environment where boys or girls were not allowed to have emotions. Oftentimes boys
mm-hmm.
are told to not be sad and to not feel things and,
Mm,
brush it off, be a man.
yeah.
And so what we tend to see in the research is that in a population, men tend to be, men tend to be higher on avoidant attachment compared to women.
Mm, yeah, that makes total sense. So this is going back to then parenting, which we spoke about before we started recording, that a lot of people in this community are either like hoping to be parents soon and they have fertility struggles, which we could talk about that too, with communication and stuff, or they are pregnant and they're like I am right now, moving into parenthood. So all of these different types of situations obviously bring different stressors to the relationship. So I
Mhm.
do want to eventually talk about maybe how we could be supportive parents with teaching our children and having them have secure attachment styles. But before we get into that, for when you are in these, different seasons where even if it's an exciting thing, like we're about to become parents, it's exciting. It's not a bad thing. It's an exciting thing, but it's a stressful thing too. And it also, what I found too, is like there is obviously differences going on in your body. So connections can be different from a sexual standpoint. Also in postpartum, obviously there's a lot of more time where you're not going to be having sex, and that could be a big piece of connection. So like, how do we navigate that? Or if you are going through fertility struggles, how can we communicate so it's not, like you said before, us against each other and it's us against the problem? So I know there's like so much in there, but I don't know which angle you want to take to talk about that.
You've asked the like ultimate all being
Yeah.
question. Let's develop a 4-part mini series.
Yeah.
Well, okay, I'll go in it this route as maybe a way to explore what's happening in our relationship, how we can create some protection for it, and maybe factors we want to move forward. And I'm going to go to my 4 C's. So I actually talk about this at the end of my book that's coming up.
Yes.
Although I
What?
didn't sign up for this.
Yes, I was gonna say, make sure you say the name of it. I didn't sign up for
Yes,
this. Stories
I
of
didn't
unlocking
sign
old
up for this.
patterns. Yes.
Yes. So the book, which comes out September 12th, and the book is actually 5 case studies
Mm.
of couples who are working through difficult relationship patterns. And these are the common themes that show up in my office. So at the end of the book, I offer 4 C's. And one, we can look at curiosity. We need curiosity in our relationship. When we have curiosity, it helps us to build understanding and empathy towards our partner. Similar to what I said earlier, in the sense that when our partner says, I don't want to go to therapy, if we're embodying curiosity in our relationship, we can ask from a place of openness, saying, huh, I get it. Actually going to sit in front of a stranger is really hard. Tell me what your experience is like. Or when your partner doesn't text you and arrives home late, and he or she had agreed to arrive at 5 p.m. and it's now 7 p.m. Instead of railroading them and attacking them, you say, okay, this, my feeling right here is one of hurt, and I'd like to understand what happened. And then how can we go forward from that? So curiosity, people do things for reasons, and we need to keep getting to know our partners and be curious. The second one is compassion. We offer often so easily compassion to our children or compassion to our dear friends. We might even hold a space of more compassion for our coworkers, but then we turn to our partners and we have completely different expectations. If I go back to the sock example, you left the socks again. Why? We've talked about this. How many times do I have to say this? And it's kind of funny, being a mom of 2, sometimes I can hear that in my voice of like, how many times do I have to ask you to pick up your socks?
Yeah.
Right. And the reality is that you and your partner are going to have the same fight for the next 5, 10, or 25 years, because this is what happens when you are in a significant relationship and you bring in your different stuff from your own histories. But if we can show up to the socks with compassion, which might sound like, oh, I remember he's got that meeting this morning and he must have been in a rush because he told me he was stressed about it. Or if they're struggling with something in one of those difficult parenting moments, you don't say, okay, like I'm up all night, so you can just pull it together.
Yeah.
You say, gosh, I know what that feels like. And you're not alone in that struggle. Curiosity, compassion, connection, especially moving through the parenting stage and the fertility process, is that we get narrowly focused on the things in front of us. And we lose those points of connection.
Yeah.
And we focus on outcomes. So for example, if someone has a new baby, the outcome we're going to focus on is, will they sleep for a 4-hour chunk, right? Like, they need this. And so we focus on that outcome. And it's Corinne, like I can remember being like, okay, we did one story last night. It was the shark pajamas. It was like a 3 rock moment and then out. So like, let's do that again.
Every single night. Yeah.
So we pour our focus out to that. Or if we think of the fertility process around, I have to do X and you have to do Y, and we can only do those things. Or if we're thinking about sex, focusing on orgasms and outcomes, we lose that connection. We lose the ability to turn towards our partner. And one thing I appreciate about this season in a relationship is just how busy it is. Connection doesn't mean that you are going on a week getaway somewhere. It means that when your partner looks out the window and their eyebrows are scrunched and they're like, it looks like it's going to rain today, you don't stay on your phone. You're like, Instead, you turn to them and you're like, yeah, what do you think about that?
Right. It could be like just little moments like that.
Little moments of turning towards your partner. And this is what the Gottmans talk about in their work and research, is that they found that couples who turned towards each other had a stronger connection and were more likely to be together at a post follow-up in their research. So these are showing your partner that you're attuned to them, and that if they come to rub your back, you don't just brush it off. You say, hey, thanks for connecting with me in this moment. Or if they say, yeah, the day was stressful, it's fine, you say, oh gosh, I hear in your voice that there's something else happening. Tell me what happened. I want to listen. That's
Yeah.
connection. The last one is collaboration. And I think this is a really interesting one because what we end up doing in relationships is that you versus me piece instead of being a team and being a united front.
Yeah.
So if there's a work event at 7 p.m. on Friday and you say yes without coming to your partner and say, where are we at on Friday? I have this going on. What do you have going on? How would it work for you for me to do this? Right. It's like, it's the we-ness. We consider the us part,
Right.
because it's not just an independent experience. And then when we think of dealing with family, what are your birthing wishes? How involved do you want parents to be? Who's going to be expressing those boundaries to whose parents? And are you making those decisions together?
Right. Oh, wow. It was so good. Okay. Love that. The 5 C's. That's amazing.
4 C's.
The 4 C's. Sorry. It's amazing. You do 5 case studies. I'm like, I know you said 5 something with the book. 5 case studies in the book. Okay.
Wait, did I miss a C?
4
Oh no, I
Cs.
didn't miss a C.
Okay. Amazing. Okay. So what I want to talk about, because I know this is a lot in the book too, are patterns. And like you said before, like we're going to be continuously having like similar arguments that seem to be like, okay, we just talked about this, or why is this the same thing that comes up over and over and over and over again? When you could identify like it's not what it's actually signaling the argument, but it's what's underneath it. So how do we like uncover what's underneath these arguments and break through those patterns?
Yeah, that's a good question. So asking ourselves, so first, getting my book is going to be incredibly helpful.
Yes.
And I will give you 5 great stories within that book and some reflection pieces at the end of each chapter.
Oh, amazing.
But the other piece there is being able to go inside of ourselves and asking ourselves, okay, this behavior of mine, where did I learn this? Who did I see do this in front of me? What did my parents do in their relationship? What role am I taking on there? Am I just like my mom who did what? Was mom critical? Was mom defensive? Who did this with me? Was mom defensive with me or critical with me? And then how am I doing that moving forward? And sometimes we have to ask ourselves this in this moment, this trigger that's happening. Am I here right now with my partner, or am I mapping this onto old experiences?
Yeah, like, oh, well, you did this last time, so I'm just expecting that you're going to do it again.
Sure. Right. And then also asking ourselves, this feeling has also been felt in other places. Was it with a best friend when you were 8 years old and you went to school one day and they excluded you? Was it with a sibling? My husband and I have the story around the soap in the bathroom. So my soap, it's mine. I've chosen my own special one and he has his own. And then when his runs out, he uses mine and he doesn't close the cap. And well, in my opinion, if you don't close the cap, then the soap is going to dry out. And so I would ask, can you please close the cap afterwards? It's fine if you use it. I'd rather you not, but I get it. But just please close the cap.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't and he wouldn't. And Corinne, sometimes I'm not the best at the decisions I make. So I kind of went down the road of like, well, that's fine. I will take my soap out of the bathroom and so you can't use it. Very childlike of me to do that. And then that didn't work because then I was in the shower without my soap when I forgot to take it back in. So then I had to dig a little bit deeper. What is this really about? So I'm feeling triggered by the soap. And it sounds so silly, but I'm not going to get caught up in criticisms around myself because that doesn't help us discover or move through things. Okay, I'm having this reaction. This reaction matters and it's a pain point for me, but I have felt this somewhere before. And it was for me tying back to in another relationship where my stuff in the household was not respected. And having a big sister, she was able to use my things and that's what she did. But for me, that never felt good.
Yeah.
And so when I say to my partner, it's not about the soap, it reminds me that my space is not respected. And I'm desperately looking to feel like I have my own things and to be respected. And the moment he can see that and understand it, it changes the conversation.
Right. It'll make him more like want to, okay, let me just like put the cap back on because this is like such a deeper thing. It's not just her being like annoying and wanting the cap to be on.
Right. Right. The frequent close the cap, put the cap on. Can you
Yeah.
right? That becomes frustrating and irritating. And then his job there is then to be able to say, okay, I hear how important that is. And that's something that I can be more mindful and attuned to moving forward to. And I
Hmm.
know what people do though, because then I hear from so many people that come to me and they say, Dr. Tracy, I tried telling the deeper stuff and he just doesn't do it
Mm.
and nothing changes. And at that point, it becomes really difficult because we have to ask ourselves, can we do some of this healing for ourselves?
Hmm.
And can we accept that this is something that our partner can't do? So for me, using this example, okay, scale of 0 to 10, how important is the cap? I can put it pretty low on the important list.
Right.
And I'm going to make sure that I'm filling my bucket up of how I feel in my own space, and I'm going to carve out my own something somewhere else. And right. So
Hmm.
it becomes that work for myself,
Right.
because what we have to accept is that we can't make other people change.
Mm. Yeah. And you can't rely on someone else's actions to determine how you feel or how you move through a situation. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's so real. I love that. And then with like going into becoming parents, like transitioning into parenthood, what would you say is like something that obviously that takes a toll on your marriage? I'm assuming. I shouldn't say
Mhm.
obviously, but I'm assuming because I
Mhm.
haven't done it yet. But I'm sure like, there's obviously a whole new human that you're taking care of that's going to be both of your main focuses. And I could
Mhm.
see that it would be very easy to lose that connection piece, or that maybe not the collaboration, but the connection piece with your
Yeah.
partner, or the compassion because you're running on no sleep or whatever it is. What would you say would be something that could be really, I don't want to say preventative, but something that you and your partner can do before the baby comes, maybe some conversations to have,
Mhm.
to prep for it, and then maybe in those early stages too, I don't know if there's like touch points or something that you would recommend doing in that early stage so that you are coming at it as a team instead of taking maybe frustrations and fatigue or whatever out on each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I have some really great free resources on my website if people want to take a look at that.
Oh,
In terms,
perfect.
I have 100 questions to deepen your connection. And this isn't about sex. This is about overall emotional intimacy, because sometimes what we do once we leave the early honeymoon stage is we lose that curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And these questions are about losing our outcomes and just exploring things with our partners. Like one question on there is like, name 3 people, past, present, that you would love to have dinner with.
Yeah,
Doesn't
just like
matter
something
who. Yeah,
fun.
something fun, right? So this
Mm-hmm.
idea of continuing to build connection in small ways. So if you don't already, plan some kind of touch point, whether it's at the end of each day, if it's this
Mm.
10 minutes laying in bed talking, or on the couch, or if it's a weekly meeting where you do that every Sunday night, you get
Mm-hmm.
your tea or your coffee or whatever it is, and then you have your 30-minute touch point and have a set flow of questions
Mm.
so that you can practice going back and forth. And the set flow of questions would be both positive and negative to get feedback. One is, what are you grateful for in our relationship? The other
Mm.
one is, was there a stressful moment this past week where I didn't support you and you needed my support? And
Mm.
then 3 might be, what kind of support can I offer you in the week moving forward? And so by doing those touch points, it's an opportunity for us to connect frequently during such a busy season. I think the
Mm.
other thing, so that having those like regular rituals and routines in place is really important when all of our focus has now shifted onto our dependent little beings.
Yeah. And would you give the same advice as you did before if someone it has a partner and they are like, I would like to do this 30-minute checkpoint or whatever, and the partner seems a little
Hmm.
defensive about it? Would you
Hmm.
just do the same advice? Like, okay, why is
Yeah.
that something that you don't want to do? Okay.
Yeah. And then come to the table too with a, so our connection is important, both emotional and physical and sexual, and they all go
Mm-hmm.
together.
Mm-hmm.
So what ideas do you have for us to connect? And maybe they say, well, I love to do a card game. Oh, cool, let's do it.
Well, I do that
Or
instead.
yeah, I've had some couples say that they play video games together and that is a
Mm-hmm.
way to draw something out, or it's the time just side by side, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's something that has to work for everybody. But when someone says, I don't want to do that, I encourage people to not accept that as an answer, because a healthy relationship is about finding those touch points of coming back together,
Right.
and not just accepting that you can go and be in your own rooms and not focusing on that connection point.
Mm,
When I think about the transition into parenthood, a lot of parents miss talking about what roles they want to play,
mm,
or what roles they saw their parents play, and what will we do if. So some great prep questions are, what will we do if I am so tearful and I was up all night?
mm,
What will we do if um I keep kind of spiraling to the worst case scenario?
mm,
What signs might you see from me if I'm struggling with anxiety or depression, and vice versa? And then what do I
ooh,
need you to do? Because oftentimes in the moment, it's really hard to be able to say, I'm crying all the time. I'm having all of these distressing, hard thoughts of like the worst
mm,
case scenario, and I can't get out of my mind. So I need help. And if we can do that in advance to then be able to say, these are the warning signs. Like if you see me not showering, if you see me not texting my friends, if you see
mm,
me saying kind of these big thoughts, I want you to say, hey, love, this is one of those times. And I'm going
mm-hmm,
to like, let's find a therapist for you so you can
mm-hmm.
speak to someone.
I
I think
love
that's a
that.
really important piece.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then you obviously recommend doing that before the baby comes, to have,
Ideally, or still after. And that's okay
right.
too.
Yeah, true. If someone's listening to this and they're like, all right, I didn't do any of this, but like you could still do it now. So that's really helpful. And then, for the sex piece, like obviously there's a specific amount of time post pregnancy where you aren't able to have sex. Even towards the end of your pregnancy, you're like, you can, it's a little uncomfortable, it's a little different. Like it's just, things are a little bit different. Um, how how have you experienced like how to navigate that, getting back into that after a longer period without it? Because a lot of times for some people that could be their quote unquote love language or a really
Mm-hmm.
important way to deepen that connection. And when that piece is gone, on top of just the big changes, what are some other ways, aside from like having this weekly meeting or something where we can connect or just like kind of navigate that change in sex life phase?
One of the things I like to say to partners is to take the pressure to have sex off of the table for the first year. There are
Mm,
so many changes that are happening for you. And anytime we add pressure onto something, it stops it. It kind of
mm-hmm,
kills the desire. You have the reaction to want to do the opposite. So let's remove the pressure. This doesn't
mm,
mean we're removing intimacy altogether, but we're removing the pressure to have the end goal of orgasms in some way.
right.
And instead, then we need to find ways that feel good for us with where we are at. There is so much happening that, some people put pressure on themselves to have sex at 6 weeks, and that doesn't feel good for them, and they feel
Mm-hmm.
pain. And then in the long run, they end up feeling pain, and that then kills their desire.
Right.
Um, there is no right or wrong in terms of how long you wait to return to intercourse or to
Mm-hmm.
orgasms or to sex, whatever that looks like for you.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a decision between both people. With that, find ways that are going to meet each other's needs. And when a partner says, I need to have sex, I say, yeah, and they can also have orgasms by themselves. But
Mm-hmm.
that is not a reason for a partner, a woman, a mother to have to pressure herself into something that her body is not ready to do. And there
Mm,
are lots of other ways that people can feel loved, which is cuddling, which
right.
is getting a cup of coffee, combing someone's hair,
Mm-hmm.
sharing a show together, all of these other forms of intimacy. But we need to make sure we remove that pressure. And that is the most important thing that I share to parents entering into the season.
Yeah, I love that because it's true too for the woman after, like your body is obviously completely different. If you're breastfeeding,
Mm-hmm.
you probably feel like you have so much physical touch from another little being that it could just be something you're like, I'm just not ready to do this right now. And also depending on
Yeah.
your birth and what happened,
Always. Yep.
that's really good advice of just removing the pressure for the first year. That's like even just like, okay, let's just like that's a good like blanket statement to be like, okay, obviously if it happens before then, that's
You're
great, but
ready if
like,
you're ready. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Okay, love that. Um, and then what about like different parenting styles and how you navigate that? Because obviously, like you said before, you're coming into a relationship, you have both been parented in extremely different ways most of the
Mm-hmm.
time. And a lot of times we, you know, will mimic what our parents do, but obviously, hopefully, because our generation, it's very different. I know there's a lot more parents now wanting to do more gentle parenting and all of that, which is amazing. And that's, you know, my goal and desire. But I'm sure there's times when these other just things like pop up from our subconscious and just what we're used to and trying to navigate that together. So how do you, you know, guide couples who have different parenting styles to work through that? I don't know if that's something you could do before or if it's something that you kind of figure out as you're going through it.
Mm. I mean, it would be fantastic if we can talk about what did you like that your parents did growing up? What did you not like? And sometimes people don't quite have access to that until their then 2-year-old is crying in front of them, right? So sometimes they don't have access to that information. One of my general guidelines for parents is that as long as it comes from a place of my child is safe emotionally and physically, then we want to ensure that we acknowledge that two people can parent a child differently and that it only takes one parent to consciously parent, to do the gentle parenting, to build a secure attachment style. Because otherwise, if we enter into this saying, you have to do it this way, then we teach our children what it looks like to criticize each other. But then 2, we minimize and dismiss maybe some of,
excuse me.
bless
Sorry.
you.
Thank
We
you.
minimize and dismiss some of the strength that our partner brings in. So for example, you know, my strength as a therapist is I am a really good validator. I will see that emotion and I will validate it. And that's just my thing.
Yeah.
And I can do that with my children. And my partner, my husband, he's going to parent differently than me. He might not deeply validate in the way that I do, yet I'm also not the one playing floor hockey with my kids, and he is. And he can do that amazingly, and I don't. So we all have strengths that we bring into the parenting dynamic, and that we are supposed to have different needs met with different parents.
So
So
it's okay to see those different styles as a child.
yeah. Yeah. Our job is not to tell our partner to be exactly like us. And I think oftentimes what that comes from is this place of fear. We don't want to ruin our children. We don't want our children to go off to therapy. And, you know, I've often joked with people saying, yeah, I've got a fund ready for my kids to go to therapy. Therapy is great. There's nothing wrong with going to it.
Everyone's going to need it at some point.
We all need it. We all have our stuff, right?
Yeah.
So even if you try to do all of the gentle, conscious parenting stuff, they still need support. So I think in this way, we have to remove the fear. And as long as our children are safe. And so my husband and I actually created this rule in our relationship that really served us well. If you notice something around safety, I'm allowed to tell you. And if I'm defensive, if I'm short, if I'm hostile, you don't get to say anything about it. All you get to say is, thank you for letting me know, because it comes down to safety. So if the car seat straps weren't tight enough, and I say, dude, just straps, you know, like you got to put them tighter.
Yeah.
And that's not the best way to communicate something.
Right.
But he is, yep, thank you for letting me know. Or if I had cut a grape and it wasn't to the right size and he says grapes, and I'm like, oh, yes, thank you. Right. So when it comes to safety, you've got to have some kind of agreement that your priority is safety. And then if our children are physically safe, then all of that other piece is the ways that we show up differently. And different does not mean bad.
I love that. That's so good. So it's like, don't come at me if I tell you something about safety, even if it's not in the best way communication wise.
Right.
And then like in front of the children too, what is your recommendation for if there's some kind of conflict? And obviously you don't want to be screaming and yelling ever, but like, of course, not in front of the children, but, you know, I'm sure sometimes there could be something that comes up where it will be like a little bit of an argument or a disagreement about something in front of the kids. Like, how do you recommend going about that? Like, would you just be like, okay, let's just pause, we'll talk about this later, or like show the repair after in front of them? Like, how does that look like?
In an ideal world, we would not have to get into heated moments in front of our kids. Don't we all wish that? And yet at the same time, when we think about what it means to be real with our children, showing conflict teaches our kids a really important piece, which is all relationships have conflict. It is normal in a relationship to disagree. So when,
Mm-hmm.
dad says he's making pizza and I'm like, oh, pizza again. Like, I'm exhausted of pizza. Like, I'm just taking a silly example, but
Yeah.
it's important that our kids see that. And they also see us modeling, gosh, I kind of spoke short with you there. I was really sharp and I'm sorry. That's something that I'm working on. And that's not my intention to be able to be short with you. So
Mm,
next time I'm going to try to speak with using my kind words,
mm,
because oftentimes people, and for those listening, ask yourself, what did your parents do with anger?
mm-hmm.
And did you see it? Did you see them process it? Did you see someone slam the door or someone walk out, or you could feel the anger in the room, but no one ever said it? And
Mm-hmm.
then did you ever see your parents repair?
Mm,
And many people tell me they did not. And
mm-hmm.
so one of the things we've been working on is, the rule in relationships is that there's no criticizing and attacking the character of the other person in front of the children.
Mm,
We're allowed to disagree in front of them. We are allowed to talk through and work through conflict. We want to make it age appropriate in front of them.
right.
It's and then also making sure we are respectful and trying to find a resolution. So we'll say things at the dinner table of, that's an interesting opinion. I don't see it that way. And I think I see it this way. And
Mm,
could you maybe see where I'm coming from in that perspective?
I love that. So it's about if there is a conflict that they're old enough to hear, then
Mm-hmm.
okay, let them also see the repair.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and then that piece too of, if it gets to yelling and shouting, you've got to stop. That's
Mm-hmm.
not what our kids need to hear. It is
Mm-hmm.
threatening to their brains. It doesn't feel good. And that is a like, no, we're not doing this. And I actually
Mm-hmm.
worked through this with a client recently where her husband was dysregulated and she was trying to get him to stop and he wouldn't. And we talked about like, what can you do in those moments? Which is, okay, I'm going to take a 2-minute bathroom break and I'll be right back. And then
Mm-hmm.
hope that 2 minutes is enough to reset it. And if
Right.
it's not, leave the table again, because we
Mm-hmm.
don't want our children to see the denigrating and hostile comments back and forth.
Yeah. So it's just whatever amount of time, whether it's 2 minutes, whether it's the next
Mm-hmm.
day, like
Yep.
just do whatever you have to do because that's true. Like that's something, yeah, that we definitely don't want them to see.
Yeah.
And then the last thing on the parenting, which was we kind of touched on with the attachments, is how can we foster secure attachments in our kids? What are some things that you recommend for, helping that? Well, obviously, things are going to happen, but how do you recommend we can go about doing that?
Mm-hmm. So, from a parenting perspective, I like to remind people that to develop a secure attachment, you need to meet the cues of your child 30% of the time.
30%. Oh, wow. That's not that
Whoa,
much. Yeah.
it's not that
No,
much.
I was expecting way more than that. I thought it was gonna be like all the time.
Right. So
24/7.
but let's think about that. Baby starts to
Wow.
cry, and maybe it was one of those moments where you didn't hear it and you slept through, and they were able to sleep through and they fell back to sleep. That would be a moment where you missed a cue.
Mm.
Or they're crying in the bassinet beside you while you have, well, out of the kitchen, but you have the boiling pot of water and you have to dump the water, otherwise it's going to overflow and burn dinner.
Right.
And you're saying, I know, my love, I can't pick you up. I'm pouring up the water right now. This is really hard. I will be there in a minute. Right? You're not meeting the need immediately. Or they
Mm.
might turn to you to check something out if I can touch something, but you don't see it, and then they end up doing something. So it's a back and forth when we develop attachment. It's not a like, one time I let my child cry and now I have ruined them, but it is the beauty of relationships and bonding, which is, you are not supposed to be a perfect parent.
Mm.
You need to be enough, and that is 30%.
And is it
And
30% per parent or just 30% of their cues, like both parents?
I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know that specifically.
Yeah,
But
that's
again,
fine.
it's that piece there of how do we show up in an enough way
Mhm.
of letting our little one know that I am here. and that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'm not going to be completely available, but I
Mm-hmm.
come back. That's what attachment is. So you
Mm,
call your partner and they don't pick up, but you just got this super stressful email from your boss. And it is like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? You call your partner, they don't pick up, you feel this rush of panic. And then you go inside your mind, and this is mentalization. And you go, oh, I know what they would say. They'd say, it's okay to make mistakes. Don't assume
mm-hmm.
the worst. You're
Mm-hmm.
good. You got this. So
Right.
you, although you did not have your partner in that moment, you held them in your mind, and
Mm,
that helped you to calm down and to feel soothed.
so it helps
So
you regulate yourself
it
too.
helps you regulate yourself. So then we
Mm-hmm.
want to teach our children, I am not going to meet every single one of your needs, but I'm always going to come back, and we're going to have this dance back and forth because we both contribute to that attachment relationship. And that's an
Mm.
incredibly powerful thing.
Yeah, and it gives so much grace for the parents of like 30%. It's like I could do 30%. Like that, that helps you feel like, okay,
Yeah.
that's more attainable, and it takes that perfection out of it, which I'm sure is
Right.
so difficult
So
of,
difficult.
you want to, especially depending on the
Yep.
personality. I know I have a personality where I'm definitely more like on the scale of wanting to do things quote unquote perfectly or more
Mhm.
controlling about stuff. So I'm sure this could be a great lesson of parenting when that time comes. So that's so incredible. Wow. All of this was just so amazing. I want to finish this off with whatever, tell us about the book. Obviously, we touched on it a little bit,
Mhm.
but anything that you also want to just leave the listener with who maybe is in a really hard season right now with their partner,
Mhm.
whether they're going through a fertility struggle, whether they're about to become parents, or they're moving, or they're grieving, or there's just like a big thing going on where they feel like stuck and they're stuck in this pattern, and it's just
Mhm.
like, oh, like I can't get out of it. Um, Maybe something that you could just like share to help them like see the light at the end of the tunnel, or like a step they could both take together. And then we'll talk about how we can find you.
Yeah, I want to encourage people to remember that relationships are supposed to go through seasons.
Mm,
And what comes with seasons are, or is rather, this element of grief, that there
mm,
is this stretching and unfolding and a loss. And as much joy comes with some of these seasons, also pain and loss comes with them. And
mm,
that oftentimes these seasons are not forever, but what we can tap back into is where we as an individual makes choices. And that I know many people will say, well, they're not doing it. Why do I have to do this first? And I
mm,
encourage people to go into what really matters to me about my relationship. And what do I want to then do each day so that at the end of the day, I can put my head on the pillow and say, I acted in the best way that I could today that is aligned with what really matters to me. And if your relationship matters to you, it's those small, frequent moments every single day. When you wake up, instead of turning to your phone first, turn to your partner and rub their back.
mm,
Get out the coffee mug for them. Express that moment of gratitude. These are just small little things that we can do that can start shifting the relationship. And we know
mm.
from a systems perspective is that when you change, there's an opportunity for the whole system to change. Opportunity,
Right.
not always. But if you are looking for more, I deep dive into this into my book. And I wrote the book in case studies because what I know is that we learn through stories. And I
Hmm.
wanted to show people, what does it look like inside of a relationship? What do couples fight about? And what does it look like inside a couples therapy session? And also in terms of what the therapist is experiencing and thinking.
Oh, so cool.
And yeah, and it's such a special piece to be able to offer to the world in this sense, because then I also do something a little bit different, which of course you don't know what is happening for your therapist because you're not supposed to know their marriage,
Yeah.
but because I also understand that so many people look at me thinking and look at their therapist thinking, you must never experience this. This is
Hmm.
something that's just me, and you've got all the skills and tools, and so you're probably fine.
Hmm.
And what I do in the book is it would have been a mess if I didn't include the changes that happened in our relationship and the difficult
Mm.
seasons that we went through
I
and
love
how
it.
I got through them. So that other people can see, hey, you know what? Dr. Tracy, she's a human too. And
Hmm.
as humans, we don't get away from struggling, and we all experience pain in somehow. And then here are all of the choices that we can make to make things different.
Oh, that's so amazing. It's so nice to see, first of all, that from like a professional and someone as, versed in this as you are, to see that experience, and then also to see it of just quote unquote regular couples because a lot of times people don't talk about this, and you feel like you're the only one who's having a difficult time. So it's so nice to see actual examples. So I love how you set the book up like that. And it's called, I didn't sign up for this. And you said it's coming out September 12th, but you could pre-order it.
You can pre-order it, and pre-order is fun. This book launch is going to be really fun. We've got lots of fun things in store, but right now, one of the biggest things you get is when you pre-order it now, I'm giving you a exclusive guide for how to tackle really hard conversations. It's got step-by-step inside of it with scripts and examples to help you actually have some of these pieces. And I just know that people are going to find that really helpful. So lots of exciting things coming with the book launch.
Amazing. And where could they pre-order it?
drtracyd.com/book.
Okay.
We'll have all the links on it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Or you can search me on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you look for books.
Oh, amazing. And your podcast as well. What's the name of your podcast?
My podcast is called I'm Not Your Shrink, which really
I love it.
Kind of catapulted all of this because I wanted to show up outside of my therapy room as a human saying, I'm not your therapist, but hey, I'm human and I also struggle with these things. And isn't it important when we have this collective experience of saying, yeah, I get it. I really get it.
It's really good. Your podcast is amazing. Obviously, I cannot wait to read your book. And then on Instagram, is that the best place to find you social media wise?
Yes, it's Dr. Tracy D on Instagram. And what I love, one of the most meaningful things to me, and maybe you can relate to this as well, is I love when people hear me somewhere and then come and send me a DM and tell me what stood out for you. What was the piece that you needed to hear today? Please send me a DM because I love being social and getting to connect with more people.
Yes, that's how we connected, because I reached out to you because it really is like the best thing, especially as a podcaster, as someone who goes on podcasts, like we're just talking with each other right now, which is amazing, but there's people listening. And a lot of times, like you might never hear if it impacted them or not. And it's so nice to hear like what actually stood out. So that is literally the best thing you could do to thank our guest, Dr. Tracy, for taking this amount of time, whether you just, like she said, DM her, let her know what stood out, share it on your social media and tag both of us. It's really such a helpful way and way to thank, our guests for just taking this time out of their day. So I appreciate you so much, Dr. Tracy. I cannot wait to read your book. All the links will be in the show notes for your book, your podcast, your Instagram, everything. Thank you again for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Corinne. And thank you to everyone listening and joining us today.